Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. It's of course Andrew Esquire here from the Legal Mindset, where we teach you to be your own judge. Good morning, good evening, or night, wherever you are. It is morning here, Saturday morning in Seoul, South Korea. I know for most of you in the East Coast, it's Friday evening, and wherever you are, no matter how dark or light it is outside, I'm very glad you're here with me. Whether you're over on YouTube, whether you're on Rumble, or whether you're one of those that handful of degenerates that's in the locals chat that's going to be passing us memes throughout the day. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you hanging out with me tonight. I know you wanted to hear. I got news for you. All right, I'll play that. I did skip that part of the intro. I got you. I got you, buddy.
I am not gay. I have relationships with women, sex with men.
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
I will deal with muting that song and dealing with the copyright altercations just for you. That's how much I love you guys. Seriously. And also make sure you've smashed the like button. Make sure you subscribe wherever you are. YouTube is for sure hardcore censoring us. So let's try to fight that a little bit. Make sure you still got the bell dinged and everything else there. Rumble, okay. Rumble, they completely changed the layout today on Rumble. So Rumble looks entirely different. So much like a lot of times with your college girlfriend, you can't find it. And I could not find the pussy today, and it's actually turned into a thumbs up, and it's down like middle left. So let me show you guys over here on Rumble. It's actually changed its location down here to the bottom left, right over here. So you can go down there, smash that like button right underneath if you are on if you're on Rumble. Now, without further ado, my guest today has not been on my show before, and that is something that I needed to correct right away, forthwith. So without further ado, it is Andrew Burkhart of Andrew Burkhart.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Really happy to have you on. I was actually like going through, so sometimes I go through periods of being really lazy and like not interviewing anybody and like just being by myself, and I'm like, all right, I got to start talking to people again and not being a hermit. And I realized like you've never been on my show, and I was like, how is this possible? Because we've been on so many times. Yeah, I know we've been on so many times with Nick and with I think as well with Andrew Branca. I think we were either on his channel or just Andrew's always around when we're around. Yeah, I know I needed to fix that. It's weird.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's overdue.
Yeah, it's definitely overdue. And I was so excited because when I was looking for people to talk to this week, I was looking for also people that were covering the Kohberger case. And when I realized, okay, I haven't talked to Andrea, and I thought about you, I looked at your page and I'm like, she is breaking some people's backs over here on Twitter. And I am always here for it. If you guys do not follow Andrea on Twitter, her handle here, aburkhartlaw, you can go ahead and drop her a follow. 53.3K followers on Twitter, which is pretty damn good. But one thing you were wrecking people on, and I see you're still posting on it now, but even before, was the gag order around this case. So you were just really, really lighting people up. There was, people that were putting out information that's been really bad on this gag order. So that's something that I think I maybe wanted to start with on this case, but maybe perhaps a little bit before that. About big cases like this, whenever we get like a big murder case that's going to be sensationalized, what's you're a public defender, right? So that's your background. Can you talk a little about like the public's tendency to handle these cases and kind of how it goes down with how they react, how information is put out there regarding like really big murder cases when they're really looking to find somebody on these cases?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a shit show. Most of my practice has been in small communities, like very similar to Moscow, Idaho. I spent the bulk of my career in Walla Walla, Washington, which is about 40,000 people, not very big. But you see the same types of phenomena happening. It's just a matter of scale when a case is really high profile like this. And the thing that happens, and I've pointed this out before, is just this kind of phenomenon where it's almost like everybody kind of wants to have a connection to it. Everybody wants to have like a way that they dated somebody whose cousin was in the car, with Kohberger going to a party one time, and so with this impulse to kind of everybody having a personal connection with the case, that can be a big source of a lot of misinformation that comes out and then kind of circles the ether, especially in a media environment like this, where there is just such a massive appetite for really anything, any new information at all that can be handed out. And so with all that competition, of course, the mainstream media is not necessarily all that interested in vetting the information they get. It's not going to help them to not run something salacious. So they'll just run it. And, then we run into these problems that we're already starting to anticipate, with potentially tainting jury pools, having problems with the presumption of innocence, the case being tried in the public arena and all of that.
I think we've been together on the stream with many different cases that have been already tried in the court of public opinion, whether it was Rittenhouse who crossed state lines, whether it was Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and of course, Johnny was an abuser by then, or whether it's any of these self-defense cases where, it's clear that, obviously the person with the gun is a bad man, right? Because he shouldn't have had a gun in the first place. We see this over and over and over and over again. And I think this one is already heading down. I think it took like a day or two after he was named as the suspect for people to be, out there pointing a finger. Even before the affidavit was dropped, I saw people based on the traffic stop video saying, 100% guilty. And then during the extradition hearing, one of the reporters was asked, about commenting on one of the questions, which they said they couldn't comment on, but they asked anyways, was about the guilt of Kohberger and, whether they feel they're guilty. How guilty is he? It's not a matter of guilty, how guilty is he?
How guilty is he?
it was starting so early, and I'm like, this is going to be bad, because there's so many people that are thirsty for blood on this. Perhaps because it involves, and I'm going to say it, perhaps it involves 3, very attractive young blonde white women, and one, and the guy, for what he's worth, a young guy, very young people, their lives were cut short. Maybe it's because of the victims, but I think that the level of attention on this and the level of scrutiny on Kohberger is high. It's huge on this.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, and I think we're in an era where things are kind of changing. I mean, as you know, we had this massive drop off in crime starting in the 90s. We have been in one of the safest eras to be alive, for the last couple of decades. And it's always hard to measure trends like while you're in them. You kind of need some data to be able to look back, but there are potentially some indications that might be changing. There have seemed to be some rises in violent crime and stuff over the last couple of years. And part of this era that we've been in is that you haven't seen a lot of this stuff, these types of serial-ish types of murders that really have captured people's attention. I mean, there's people that will always be fascinated with your Ted Bundys and your Golden State Killers and your Richard Ramirez's and things like that.
The historical data. And I think there's to me, Andrea, there's a big difference between a historical case where we're pretty sure we got the right dude versus we have not gone through the due process that is merited to this individual by the Constitution. They have not received their due process. And I think you're echoing this a little bit, is that the media attention, the court of public opinion is in my opinion, violating their due process, because it's going above and beyond where what they should be talking about prior to a trial, before anything's been proved.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why, I do have a lot of sympathy for what the judge is trying to do with this gag order. I completely understand why he's wanting to do that. I just have kind of some opinions about the effectiveness of what he's trying to do and the potential for it to backfire. The the problem with gag orders like these that I mentioned on my Twitter is that we're still getting all kinds of stories with leaks, from anonymous law enforcement sources. And so what tends to happen is that these things just put a finger on the scale. It's going to shut up the defendant very effectively, but it's not going to stop the massive institution that is the police from continuing to potentially dribble out information anonymously like this. And part of the reason is just because it is a huge institution, and there's police officers talk to each other like that's normal. You would expect that the guys who went
in
to
Moscow,
the house and raided the parents' house and pulled them out. They told everybody they knew about every detail about that. I mean, that's one of the most interesting things they've ever done on their job. And so even if there's a way to gag that particular officer, you can't necessarily gag everybody that he talked to. So there's just this massive pool of potential information that's out there ready to be leaked. And then, of course, the other side of it is you have to look at enforcing the gag. Like, realistically, what are they going to do to try to hunt down who these sources are? I try not to be cynical, but I'm just skeptical that is going to be a priority for their resources when they have a potential death penalty case that they're trying to build up and prosecute.
Yeah, I mean, if it's very obvious, right? Like a law enforcement agent comes out using his face on TV and makes a statement he's not supposed to make, yes, that'll be enforced, right? If they're going on Nancy Grace, right? If they're going, whatever they're going out there and doing, obviously, then you can get them, right? Or if they're going out there and signing something or disclosing something, and it's very clear for chain of custody that it's that person that made that statement or gave that opinion, document, whatever else is. But you're right. If it's just buddies down at Katie's Cup of Joe, and they're talking about what happened, and it's Moscow, Idaho, right? It's not this giant town. I used to work in a small town in Western North Carolina, which had a population of about 10,000, 15,000, which is, by the way, the population of Moscow without the students is under 10,000, I believe. So very, very, very small town. Everybody is up in everybody else's business. Anybody who's lived in a small town knows that's what's up. Everybody knows everybody. All the cops, all the prosecutors, all the judges. Literally everybody's up in everybody's business. So to me, is it weird there's leaks? No. And I know you mentioned it before, but I'm already getting, just from my little piddly ass coverage, I'm getting people that are sending me emails, sending me DMs that are like, my cousin dated a cop on the Moscow, Idaho. I went to U of I and I know somebody who knows somebody, and here's my insider information. It's very funny how the insider information usually turns out to be just linked to articles and Reddit posts. But it's very interesting how that's insider information. But that aside, there's such a push to get information. People are so hungry for information that I think there's even people that are faking it at this point and saying, hey, yeah, I know somebody who's a cop. And they're just making shit up because they want to be involved in this. They want to be connected to this, like you said, and have that piece of history, right? Claim, hey, I was a part of this murder case. I helped get this guy convicted. They want to be that little thing.
And you're already starting to see a lot of that fall apart. I mean, Joseph Morris got into a whole bunch of trouble. If you're not familiar with him, he's got a YouTube channel. He's come under fire before for kind of probably fabricating some stuff, and there is some stuff he put up that looks like he was fabricating evidence in this Idaho case, and pretending that it was real. There was the TikToker who was accusing a professor of WSU at being the murderer. The professor's now sued her for defamation. Like, it's gotten kind of crazy with the theories and the sleuthing and stuff like that.
Yeah, already. I mean, and already, like there hasn't been that much time. I feel so bad. I've seen so many things on the Grubhub food truck guy. I mean, RIP the Grubhub food truck guy. Because there's people that are saying he's a glowy, like that he's a Fed. This guy. I mean, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories out there. And even when the police clear these people, because of the internet, the way the internet works, or internet sleuthing, they got the wrong guy, or this guy was helping Bryan out. and their lives get absolutely 100% ruined. But let's start with the gag order because you're busting in on that, and I've got all the documents pulled up here, guys. It's on Idaho cases of interest. So right over here, this was the original gag order, correct? So the non-dissemination order.
Yes.
So do you want to walk people about what to you stood out about this order? I think the first thing that I brought up, which I think something that you brought up, which is the gag order applies to parties involved. I think the first thing that people really misunderstood was they thought this meant like the media couldn't cover this case. And I'm like, no, obviously not. They cannot silence my free speech or yours, Andrea, on this. But they can tell investigators, law enforcement, attorneys, and agents of attorneys not to make extrajudicial statements. So
yeah, and the other common misconception that people had was that, oh, this means that like the court file, the PC affidavit, it's gonna, not going to be released. The court file is not going to be accessible, and none of that is the case. There are very, very strong First Amendment protections for access to court records in the United States. Gag orders, are very, very highly disfavored. They're supposed to be targeted. They're supposed to be narrow. They're supposed to be as clear and unambiguous as possible. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I see the problems with this gag order start to appear right off the very bat, is because who it applies to, the parties, including investigators, law enforcement personnel, attorneys, and agents. Law enforcement personnel, which ones? Which law enforcement personnel? Does this apply to the officers who raided the house in Pennsylvania? Does this apply to the officers in Indiana who stopped the car? Does this apply to the police officers who circled, over the parents' home the night that they were doing the raid? That's not clear. And when it's not clear, you got a big problem with a gag order, because a gag order needs to be clear. So that jumped out at me right off the bat as being really potentially problematic in terms of being able to realistically enforce this thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's saying that, hey, this is a gag order that was put out that, yes, I mean, you understand the intent, you understand what was driving it, but it's not realistically enforceable. And perhaps that's why the initial gag order got updated, right? Because this was the update to it. And there's much more detail here. To me, when I look through this particular gag order, I saw first of all, the pooled media, which I want to talk to you about. But a lot of the restrictions, it seems like it's going to be pretty restricted in the courtroom. Now, things like, having to follow the standard the COVID precautions, security screening, cell phones turned off, that's normal. But not allowing live casting, transmitting, or streaming from the courtroom. There's two separate areas under 3 media coverage B and C, where it specifically calls out that live broadcasting, transmitting, and streaming is not allowed. Mm-hmm. What did you think about that? Because I have some people saying, hey, there's a lawsuit waiting to happen on this, C-SPAN, or maybe Court TV, or maybe even Law and Cuck. Maybe one of these people that have a financial interest, a huge financial interest, are going to say, look, we got to live stream this. So, I mean, do you think that these rules are going to stand in the Second Amendment order for the actual trial? Or do you think this is just a preliminary thing at this point?
It's a good question. It's of course hard to say until the trial actually happens. My impression of what they're trying to accomplish with that provision is basically just put a delay on the stream. They're allowing the feed, they're allowing the cameras in the pooled feed, but they don't want it broadcast live. And I don't know why. It may be because they want to be just sensitive to the risk that one of the cameras could violate one of those restrictions. They accidentally catch the jury. They look at something on defense counsel table. And so, to have the opportunity to not have that go out on the broadcast before, it's too late. They may be anticipating courtroom misconduct, if nothing that I have seen so far leads me to believe that that's going to be a concern. But of course, you never know. We've had like 1 day, 2 minutes in trial, and trials can get crazy.
Sure. I mean, well, hold on. If there was going to be courtroom misconduct, because you've been in the courtroom, you're a public defender. Who's going to be the person misbehaving? Is it the defendant? Is it the people who are the victim's family? Is it the public? Who are the naughty people? Who's gonna misbehave in this? Who are they the most worried about in your professional experience?
I'm not jumping on that grenade, Andrew.
You're not,
not
okay,
jumping
right.
on that grenade. No,
All
I
right.
mean the issue is that emotions are going to run high, and you just don't know what could happen. And I'm not trying to be like insensitive by suggesting, the victims' families are going to misbehave or anything like that. No, I don't think they will. I think they'll be very, very respectful of the process. But these are just all risks that I think the court is going to be considering, the fact that things can happen.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing I was thinking might get crazy here is the folks that are not permitted access to the courtroom, because obviously they're limiting it to victim's family, defendant, attorneys, very immediate circle, which is normal with first come first serve seats, which probably are going to be taken by extraordinarily how should I put this? Either news networks that are sending their lackeys to go sit there and do it, which I think is going to be a significant amount. The Geraldos of the world, they're going to get their seats saved, much like the Casey Anthony trial, because I was covering that. They're going to have their seats saved, but there's going to be people that really want to get in and they don't get in. And those are the folks that I think could cause a scene.
Well, and there's so many factors here too. This is a college town. They have a law school there. There's educational interest for people going there. There's going to be people who were members of Sigma Chi, people who were members of the I forget the sorority that the girls were in. They're going to want to be there. I mean, there's potentially going to be an awful lot of people, like you're saying, that have an interest in being present for it. I'm about 2 hours from Moscow myself. I'm, hoping if I can get over there for some of it, that I'll be able to do that.
That would be great. Yeah, but I mean, once again, I'm sure you have a realistic expectation that there's going to be everyone, their mother, and their cats.
Absolutely.
There for that case. Speaking of everybody and their mother, did have some messages on locals. C3 Metals and a $1 tip says they took away the pussy on Rumble. Yes, it's now a like button, so just smash it. Ben SC said a $1 said good evening, Regal Mindset. Yes, that is my drinking stream Asian name when I'm late night. So yes, I changed back to Legal Mindset. We're good now. And then over here on YouTube, SS, welcome to BLM, welcome to the Base Legal Mindset, actually the Emojis Discord. So welcome, thank you very much. And Xander's Rant says, remember that time Andrea came in right when Jeff was saying something like, everyone dreams of a lawyer like them, and Nick had to ask him to clarify. Wait, what?
I don't remember that.
I was going to say, I don't remember this either. And what is Jeff doing talking about people's dreams? I don't. That's a little weird, but no, we've done a lot of shit on Nick's stream. So, I mean, you're going to have to be specific. Please restate. All right, so the gag order has been updated at least once, or was it twice? There was also a stipulation, but I believe the stipulation was kind of very short. Let me show that.
So I think there's two things we're talking about. The gag order itself, I think, is still the original, but then they did this additional order that's basically media conduct or whatever.
Yes.
So the gag order itself, they did come in and add these kind of legal disclaimers, which I thought was kind of, I don't know, clever, I guess. I mean, it doesn't really matter, of course, as you know, the law is the law. It doesn't matter if you put it in the paperwork or not. But it does kind of suggest that they're doing that at least for purposes of informing the media, informing the public that this is why these decisions are being made.
Right. And I believe these are and you talked about the general susness of gag orders on your Twitter. Can you go a little bit deeper into that? Why should we look at gag orders and say, okay, off rip, as a basis under the Fourth Amendment, they're suspect? Why should we perceive them that way?
Well, because the idea is that, we're a free speech based country. We follow the principle that more speech is better, and that if you don't like speech, you go out and argue with it. You don't just shut it up. And so gag orders they're a prior restraint. They're shutting you up before you have the opportunity to express yourself. And so there's just a very long history and tradition of that kind of thing being really, really disfavored. So, yes, they do have the ability to do it in some circumstances like this, where it is limited to certain people, where it's furthering a compelling government interest, which in this case is ensuring that due process is afforded to this guy. They don't want to have to try him over and over and over again because stuff is getting blown up, in the public record, and they can't get a jury, or the jury gets exposed to bad information, or just whatever.
Wouldn't a gag order though be? I mean, in this case particularly, isn't the intent here really to protect Bryan Kohberger? Because
Yes.
I mean, in this case, I've already seen police. In fact, before the gag order came down, there were police saying, we believe we've got the guy, and I believe I even heard the words that I think this guy is guilty. We have enough evidence to prove him guilty, or I think this guy is guilty. Which, of course, look. Law enforcement is the one filing the charging documents. I hope they would have confidence in what they're filing, but
Yes.
The media is constantly looking for people to affirm the guilt of the individual, and going to law enforcement, and coming back and getting those statements as the culpability. It feels like they're always getting a little bit more of drip drop of things they've discovered and they've not discovered. So to me, I think a gag order is good, because the police can finally say instead, hey, we've got to do this in a court of law. We can only inform you on this case as it updates in the court, and stop those statements which they're giving to media across the United States. And then the stupid assholes like us clip it, and it goes viral on social media, and even more people see it around the world. And then we've already tried this case. We've tried this case, 2 days after this guy's arrested.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, this is clearly for his benefit more than anybody else's. He is going to exercise his right to remain silent, and there is really no other advisable course of action for him. Everything that we've seen from him so far does seem to indicate he's rational. Okay, may not be everything that we would hope a human being would be. Time will tell, but he doesn't seem psychotic or delusional or anything like that. So he's capable of acting in his rational self-interest, and his rational self-interest is shut the fuck up and not say anything until the trial is able to play its way out. So it really puts them in this disparate situation where police leak, and he can't respond. He just can't. And so it really tilts the scale against him so heavily before he ever steps foot in the courtroom.
So what do you think? Because you mentioned his behavior, right? And I'm so interested to get your take on this, because I see so many people, including lawyers, right? They get into, and especially the ladies out there. I know true crime wine moms. I can see you out there. I see people with the body language stuff saying, oh, he's at the counsel table and he's sitting there, and you've got to watch his first appearance. You've got to watch where he's looking. You've got to watch, exactly how he's leaning. He scratches his head. That means he's nervous. Look, he's leaning forward, and they'll draw the little line, and that means he's guilty. What do you think about people speculating that? Because you've seen all sorts of people, as clients in the courtroom. Like, what do you think about people trying to read body language to ascribe guilt?
Well, I mean, I understand why they're doing it. And to some extent, I sympathize with it. I mean, yes, we do communicate in nonverbal ways. I think that's very clear.
That's clear.
But I think it just requires a very healthy dose of humility to recognize that, you're still kind of speculating. I mean, he may not fit the pattern for any number of reasons. So this is just, more of the hunger that people have to try to know more about this guy, to try to get further insight into the case. It doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me at all that it's happening, but no, I don't personally put a lot of weight into that kind of analysis. What I'm interested in are the things that he says, the way that he comports himself, just more general things like, is he getting along with his lawyer? Is he respectful to the judge? Those things tell me a lot more from my perspective about what is he like, what kind of client is he going to be, what kind of strategy is he going to have, then, was he leaning forward at counsel table?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like if he's acting rude to his own attorney, right, or rude to the judge or opposing counsel, whatever else it is. I mean, obviously that's going to be very telling because that's going to have an effect on the case. And if he comes off as an asshole, as somebody who's manipulative or however dislikable, generally dislikable, that's going to play out in court. I've talked about this in terms of the victims as well, like them being a certain type of victim can make people perceive it a certain way, just like him being a certain type of defendant can make him be perceived a certain way. I've already seen the reports of, okay, this guy was some sort of incel and this and that, and there's a certain picture they're painting of this guy, even though we're getting contradictory evidence on that. And also we haven't heard much about his character in general. We will at the trial, but Bryan Kohberger hasn't had many people come out and testify to his character. The things we're hearing are on Reddit. They're through law enforcement, and they're included in the affidavit.
Yeah, and part of the problem too is sort of the timing of some of this stuff coming out, because it's just it kind of makes it inherently unreliable. There is a oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for here? Oh, I can't remember. It'll come to me, but
not reliable as fuck, like sus. I mean, I don't know where you want to go. I mean,
I'm thinking about just the bias that you have, depending on the circumstances. If somebody had asked this same person about Bryan Kohberger
right
2 weeks before he got arrested, they may have very different memories and recollections and impressions of stuff that they would be inclined to bring up than after he's all over the national news media accused of a quadruple homicide. It's going to affect you and your perspective in a little bit of a different way. So to think you can get away from the distorting effects of hindsight with that type of thing, I think is kind of a fool's errand.
Yeah, when you have thousands of news headlines, probably per day, with murder and next to your name, I mean, regardless of what, people think, we're higher beings, we're evolved. A little monkey brains are like, I read murder, same sentence, I read this guy's name. These two words are associated. So now these things are associated, and forever will they be associated. And that's the true travesty of crime and criminal allegations for the innocent, is they are forever associated with that if they receive a modicum of press on those issues. Now this person is a murderer, regardless of whether they are or are not, which is sad.
Yeah, 100%.
Xander's rant says Jeff sarcastically was talking about legal eagle, but the timing sounded like he was talking about Andrea being the dream lawyer everyone wanted. Well, let's clarify.
I am the dream lawyer everybody wants.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that about you, Andrea. I really do. Also, Andrea could 100% kick legal eagle's ass. The guy is like 5'2", and he's from California. So, let's not.
Oh man, I could do it with just my jab.
I know. I've seen your boxing videos. You're serious, Andrea. You don't fuck around. And Anna P says, the worst is news anchors saying he ran home to mommy after the crimes. It was Christmas break. I also don't think the thesis survey was anything out of the normal. In undergrad, we were required to create surveys like that too. So actually, let's talk about the survey real quick. Now, I have said accidentally, I'm going to say me scoozy, because I said, hey, this does seem kind of weird. But whenever I said that, and I accidentally said that, I meant it in the context of, when you read the survey, knowing what we know in terms of the allegations. But if you remove the allegations and you said, this is a graduate student, what else are criminologists supposed to research and look into other than criminal behavior? Isn't that kind of what they do? That's like saying,
that's the whole thing.
It's weird that police officers are investigating criminals, right? It's like, that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So
No, it is. It's one of those unfortunate things that, yes, in retrospect, that looks so creepy. But at the time, this is a perfectly normal thing to be investigating. The motivations, the process, the internal process that people go through with committing crime. Yeah, that's exactly the type of thing that criminologists want to know, because that helps you understand criminal behavior and then ideally be able to prevent it. So
yeah, and that's the whole point. You have to be able to understand to prevent. Like if you don't understand, you're bound to repeat the behavior.
yeah, you're going to make the
Alan,
same mistakes.
thank you so much for the Australian 100. Aussie. Happy Saturday, Andrew. Cheers, my man. Brizzy, Australia. I had a really good time in Brisbane. I went to the koala sanctuary there. Went to a brewery there. I was really drunk. I don't remember it very much. It was a good time. So I do hope one day to get back to Australia. It's only a relatively short flight from where I'm at right now. Much further from Miami, Florida. It was much further from Miami, Florida. But appreciate that, Alan, and appreciate everybody out there. The biggest thing you can do for me, guys, is to smash that like button, and also make sure you are following Andrea on YouTube and on Twitter, because she's freaking killing it on Twitter. So let's talk about the affidavit. So before we get to some of the points I think you made, and you destroyed people on a lot of points on the affidavit, but one thing I want to get to is what new facts came out in this affidavit, that is this affidavit which starts with Exhibit A, statement of Brett Payne. What facts came out in this that surprised you?
That the roommate had seen him. No question. That was far and away the shocking piece of information.
So how did you process that? I don't want to know that, because I know how I process that, but I want to know your mind and what you thought.
My big impression as I read through this affidavit, a lot of people have asked me this question, like, what's the big thing that stood out? And the thing about it is it's almost not even one particular thing. It is the incredible serendipity, the luck that they had with some of these things that fell into place that allowed them to make the connections. The roommate seeing him, getting that visual on him, is one of those things that is absolutely critical, because without her having seen him, they had no reason to identify him, this guy from WSU with a Hyundai, as any more suspicious than necessarily anybody else in the area with a Hyundai. So it's very unlikely that they would have then been able to go and get that cell phone information, that cell site location information, the pings we call them, to be able to, ostensibly track his location and line it up with the timeline of the murders and stuff. And then as well, the fact that he had gotten that traffic stop in Moscow that let them get his cell phone. They wouldn't have been able to get his ping if this guy just wore his seatbelt. If he had been wearing his seatbelt that day, they don't have his cell phone and there's nothing to ping.
So four traffic stops. That's the thing I think a lot of people were losing at first. It seemed like there were 4 traffic stops, right? There's 2 before the murders and 2 after, which were generally in transit from Moscow to Pennsylvania. So obviously the ones before, we don't have those. I don't believe we have the video from the ones that were before the murder. I don't think we have that. I know we do have the video from the ones after. Did you take anything from the ones where we have? Let's start with the ones we have video. Did you take anything from those traffic stops?
I didn't really. I mean, I found them not particularly helpful to the state from an evidentiary standpoint. The story that's out is that they were trying to, capture injuries on his hands or something like that. There is nothing like that is plainly, evident in the videos. So the worst thing I think that comes out of it is the conversation that they had about the shooting at WSU. But that also, to me, that just doesn't seem that strange. If they're driving back, they hear it on the radio. If it seems kind of normal to me that would be that would be something that you would talk about. I think the real question is, what impression do people have of Dad here? Now, there has been so much speculation about the family, and I want to plant my flag instantly, immediately, firmly. Be kind to his family. unless and until there is evidence that they are complicit in any of this, because they have lost their son. Okay. They have gone through an incredibly traumatic experience as well. And theirs is one that people don't have a lot of empathy for. So they are suffering very much alone right now. So I just want to make sure that I get that out there. Having said that, clearly this is our first good look at Dad and Dad's interactions. And he comes across as pretty clueless, at least to me. You see, Bryan kind of continually giving him these looks like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here?
And I will tell you, Andrew, these looks, and I feel like before we got the affidavit, we had this footage, and I think people were convicting Bryan on like this look. Like they're like, look at his look. This look is a look of somebody who's guilty. So I swear to you, they convicted him on this. One thing I will say, my takeaway was from this immediately was shut the fuck up. You guys are talking way too much for a routine traffic stop. Like, I'm sorry, the police are not your friends. If you're being pulled over, this is not friendly Officer Joe who just wants to talk to you about your day. He's got better shit to do too. He does not want to be talking to you. He's investigating crime. So the amount of information they gave away was unnecessary. Now look, I do agree with you on the thing that if there's a mass shooting, that's a big news item. You want to talk about it. You want to talk about why you're leaving an area due to a mass shooting. I get that, right? It's a news item, right? If around 9/11.
The important thing to remember here too is it was a big news item because they weren't sure if it was connected to these homicides, and so it did get a lot of coverage because of that. Exactly.
Now, I will say, the dad comes off as clueless, but he comes off as a really normal guy. He doesn't come off as a weird guy or anything else. Like, this is a dad. There's nothing about him that, to me, makes him complicit in this or puts him in any level of culpability, which is exactly why I will say, look, these people are innocent. These people have nothing to do with it. And people that harassed parents, people that make comments about them and comments about the complicity, I think that's completely uncalled for. And has a lot of issues. And yes, I know it's muted. I just wanted to show these guys and the interaction here. The words really aren't that important as much as just, hey, people were obsessing about the interaction itself, right? Nothing they say in this traffic stop in and of itself leads to culpability. Just it was exciting that we have this footage in Indiana.
This was the first time, these videos were the first time we've seen him like live and in action and talking and stuff, So I understand the interest in it, but definitely as evidence, I think they have pretty minimal value.
Yeah. What do you think about, so let's talk about the roommate for a second. Do you think that creates issues here? Because when I was following this case, the issue was, hey, the roommate and the story of the roommate was that before the affidavit was that they did not call the police. They waited till the next day. They went upstairs and found the bodies and thought they were unconscious. And then a friend came over and the friend was the one who contacted police. And I believe that story was parroted by law enforcement. Now we have, Dylan, which is a girl, one of the roommates, saying that she heard all these things. She heard a commotion, heard the dog barking, heard, I think somebody's here, and then saw a black-clad figure. And according to what I'm hearing, she locked herself in, did not call the police. Did that raise alarm bells for you and kind of say, okay, well, is this something as a public defender you'd be bringing up? In the case, is this like a major point for the defense, perhaps?
I don't see it as really a major point. It's certainly something they're going to have to ask, but there's also going to be plausible explanations for it. Trauma, stress, these are complicated things.
Drinking, maybe.
Drinking might be implicated. Yeah. I told a story where when I was in college, one night about 3 a.m, I woke up and found, my door is open and these people are kind of walking around through my kitchen area. And I'm kind of, you're like trying to make sense out of things in that moment. And I remember thinking like, gosh, did my neighbor like need something from my kitchen? And they just, decided to come in. It would make no sense for them to do that. Never done anything like that before, but you're just trying to, to figure it out. And I couldn't, and it just didn't cross my mind. mind, even though I see these people, they pulled the knives out of my block in my kitchen. They're like walking around with my freaking kitchen knives. And I see this, but it just doesn't register. And so my instinct is to just sit up and say, can I help you? And I was very lucky that, they ran out of the house. They didn't run at me, but it's not a rational type of situation like that. You just don't know how you're going to respond. So I'm not going to hold that against her. I think there are going to be plausible explanations for that. But where I think it has potentially some value for the defense, although I think it's minimal, is really just calling into question the accuracy of her observations. If she is under that much stress, it makes it that much more difficult to get an accurate impression of things. A lot of people have already asked, well, why didn't she see the knife? Where's the knife? That's not how, stress memories work. Like in danger, responding to danger, that's not how that works. It would be totally, expected that you wouldn't notice something like that. So I think that, yes, they're going to have to explore it. There might be some small details like that they could poke holes in, but are they going to be substantial enough to, undo this entire circumstantial picture that the state is clearly building up here? I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, being built here.
And I want to say too that, I've said this is a circumstantial case, and people often take that as like me saying it's bad. But no, the reality is the overwhelming majority of criminal cases are circumstantial cases, because unless you catch somebody on camera, unless you have an eyewitness who sees them do it, or unless they confess, then that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with showing that their explanation isn't plausible. And if you look at the entire facts and circumstances surrounding it, you can infer that this person committed the crime. So most of the time that is what you're dealing with. And then the strength of the case just depends on how good are your facts and circumstances and how strong are the inferences you can draw from that. This affidavit, to me, at this point, is minimal. It's enough to get the arrest, but if this was what they were going to trial on, I don't think they would get the conviction. But the issue is just in my opinion.
Well, here's the thing, because Andrea, I did make the comment, and I've seen, let me put this way. I've seen convictions on less. I mean, I'm not saying that it's common, but is it, so when people say, is it possible to get the conviction? If the question to you is, Andrea, is it possible based on just the affidavit to get a conviction from a jury?
Oh, it's possible. Sure. It's possible. Sure. Yeah. But I think if you have a good lawyer who knows what they're doing, who can see the holes in it and can see the weak points in it, the areas where this is, potentially able to be attacked, that they could build enough reasonable doubt based on just this information. But the thing is that they are not going to go to trial on just this affidavit. They are just beginning the process of putting their case together, because now they have the car, now they have his house. If they have got his phone, there is going to be a gold mine of information that they would be able to get from that. So this is very likely just the tiniest drop in the bucket of what the case ultimately ends up being.
Yeah. A couple questions. Anna P says, since the prosecution is likely going to seek the death penalty, Idaho has the death penalty, by the way, does the standard for conviction become even higher? As of now, I know we aren't privy to everything yet. There's not too much room for reasonable doubt. Anna, I'll push back and say reasonable, because people confuse probable cause and reasonable doubt for some reason. I will say there's probable cause here. Like, we've met the probable cause threshold for sure, without a doubt. Reasonable doubt, I think that they can still, a good defense attorney, particularly a good defense team, can still inject a reasonable doubt. I'm with Andrea on that, based on what we've seen. So I think there is, there still does exist the potential to create reasonable doubt in the courtroom, because that's the only place where it matters, right? It doesn't matter whether the court of public opinion is convinced or not. We're not taking a poll. I'm not putting up a poll. Did he do it? Yes or no? And then based on this, he's convicted, right? Because we're not seeing the evidence. And certainly a lot of us are relying on evidence that's not really evidence, right? But yeah, Andrea, do you know anything about the standard for the death penalty in Idaho?
Yeah, so the standard itself doesn't change. It's still beyond a reasonable doubt. But in order to get the death penalty, they're going to have to allege, in addition to proving intentional killing of another person, which is murder, they're going to have
Mhm.
to prove certain types of aggravating circumstances. The prosecutor is going to have to identify which ones he's relying on and then basically prove them. So the ones that I think are obvious potential ones that will come up here for Idaho is multiple victims. If you commit more than one murder, that's an aggravating circumstance. If the murder is committed with exceptional cruelty or is especially heinous, something like that, that can be an exceptional circumstance. So there's going to be options for him to do that, and yeah, I think the fact that they haven't done it yet suggests to me that they are going to try in the time that they have that they have before he has to file that notice. He has 60 days before they have to like officially go forward with the death penalty if they're going to do that. It tells me that they are very likely going to use that 60 days to try to build as much of a case as they can to try to lean on him to plead so that they can get the conviction, get him, consecutive close to life sentences or whatever, like enough to be sure that he's not going to be getting out, but take the death penalty off the table. This is something that is controversial. I know that the victim families, the Gonsalveses have already come out, and said they want the death penalty. The victim's wishes are going to be considered by the prosecutor, but they aren't going to be the deciding factor. It's ultimately up to him. And he's going to be thinking about things like this is a huge burden on the community to go through the trial. There is always the risk that you're not going to win. It's sometimes just better to go ahead and take the bird in the hand and not roll the dice on trying to get the perfect outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you try to go for the perfect outcome and you end up losing, well, I was reviewing the Casey Anthony case a little while ago because of her new, Me Too allegations. And I think in that case, for example, that's one where they aimed way too high. And because of that, they just whiffed entirely, right? They could have had a conviction, but they whiffed entirely because they aimed too high. By the way, let me correct the statement here. I read this wrong. She said there's too much room for reasonable doubt, meaning there's a lot of reasonable doubt here. So sorry, Anna, I'm not trying to read that on you. But I do want to say one other thing on that. Is this sentencing bifurcated? Because in Florida, when we have a death penalty case, right? So let's say he's convicted, right? So, okay, he's convicted. Now we go to sentencing and you have a separate jury impaneled to determine whether he deserves life or the death penalty. Is that also the procedure in Idaho?
So in Idaho, they will use the same jury, but yes, it is bifurcated like that. They'll decide guilt first, and then they would move on to whether the death penalty should be imposed.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's the jury that decides. It's the unique sentencing piece in American law. 99.9% of the times it's up to the judge, but when it's the death penalty, it's up to the jury.
Got it. And then Ann was also saying, I read an article that said the DoorDash delivery was at 4:17 a.m. He was seen driving away from the scene at 4:25. It doesn't seem plausible that one person and enter and murder 4 people in 8 minutes. That's a good defense argument. Now, I mean, to me, is it plausible? I'm sure that a good prosecutor should be able to paint that picture, of a very quick crime.
Or that he was already in the house when the DoorDash came and went. And maybe that's why, he made the mistakes that he did. He didn't go back to find the sheath that he dropped. He left the footprint. He let somebody see him in the house because shit's falling apart around him and he needs to get the hell out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was bouncing as quickly as possible and he just forgot the sheath, right? Which is turning out to be the big one. I think that's you mentioned it. That's probably the most damning piece of evidence there. Against Dylan, right? So, against Dylan, so far it's actually not particularly strong evidence from my perspective. It was enough to make that final link to get them the probable cause they needed for the arrest, just because it shows that biological link with his father. They don't have a direct match to him at this point, at least not that we've seen in the affidavit. So we know without a doubt, they're going to go get his DNA now, and they're going to compare it to the sample that they have on the sheath. But we don't know how good that sample is. This is kind of one of these issues with DNA evidence that
It sounds real black and white, but often it's not. There are issues with quantity, there are issues with quality, and the ability to be able to make, the strength of the match that you can make depends a lot on those types of factors. So we don't know at this point from this affidavit if they're going to have enough to be able to make a strong match, a definitive match, something that's got a really high level of statistical significance. When I go into a trial and I know the state's expert is going to be testifying that, the odds are like 1 in 500 trillion that,
yes.
that somebody else, contributed this
Unless
DNA.
this was an alien. This is this. Yeah.
It's a little bit of a different scenario than when the expert's going to testify 1 in 4 chance,
That's true.
So those are the types of details that are going to matter.
Yeah. Have you ever argued DNA evidence? Have you ever been before a court and there's been DNA evidence brought up, or is that something you ever dealt with?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
I've dealt with that quite a bit.
So how do you see the presumptions? Like, do you feel like the juries give a lot of authenticity to that? Do they feel like they give a lot of weight to that? I always say, people watch a hell of a lot of CSI. So I feel like when there's DNA evidence, people are like, oh, it's bulletproof. We got DNA. We're good.
Yeah.
Let's just rely on that. Ignore everything else. DNA evidence. Let's just go with it.
And that's where it ends up 100% being the defense attorney's job to educate the jury on that. They're going to need to bring in their own expert to make sure that the jury understands. This is very, very technical stuff. And so, yes, I think ordinary default is to just assume it's pretty basic, and you compare these two things and they match or they don't. But it's far, far more complicated than that. So to bring in that expert to be able to advise and educate the jury on this is what the process is, this is what the limitations are, and help them, if there are reasons to question the strength of this particular link, to make sure that they know what those are.
Sorry, I was laughing. Somebody said a $1 tip on Locals, which says you could probably bench press Legal Eagle, Andrea. That.
Oh man, poor Legal Eagle.
Oh, poor little guy.
The only reason I say I could beat him just with my jabs because I'm like 5'10". Okay, I got
her reach is just gonna eliminate this guy. Like it's gonna be absolutely over. Rosalind Duke says he reminds me of Michael Rappaport for some reason. Maybe it's just me. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of people drawing similarities, and it's a lot of people saying based on how he looks really guilty. So I could see that. Irish Second Strong said probably very late, but how are we? We're doing good. We're doing good. Very glad to be here with Andrea. And Stina G says, what extra qualifications makes an attorney death penalty certified? Would a PD be a better choice as they're likely to get more out of these cases? Well, I believe right now he does have a public defender, at least at the initial appearance. He was deemed to be indigent, and we can talk about what that actually means. It doesn't mean he's leaving on the street. Certainly. Yeah. He has a family and had a place to go. He was not living under a bridge. But death penalty certified, what does that mean to you, and particularly in this case?
Well, it's usually defined in terms of the experience that you have. And so I am not death qualified. And the reason why is because Washington doesn't have the death penalty anymore. We haven't had it for like 10 years or so. And one of the qualifications, to be death qualified in Washington is that you have worked on a death penalty case before. So that is not available to me. So I can't do death cases, but that's fine because there aren't any. I don't know specifically what Idaho standards are. I haven't looked at that. But I would imagine it's very similar. It's typically a certain number of years in practice, certain types of cases that you've handled. Perhaps you've at least second chaired on death penalty cases before. You have experience with the types of investigators and experts and things like that you're potentially going to need. You have experience working with mitigation. This is something that's also kind of unique to death penalty cases, and it's going to be part of the process that's going on right now, is that defense typically needs to present mitigation. You need to make a case for why the death penalty shouldn't be imposed. And you typically need to make that early to try to convince the prosecutor not to do it in the first place. But then you also need to be prepared if it goes through trial and you get convicted and you end up in that penalty phase, that you have the arguments to go to the jury about why the death penalty shouldn't be imposed. And so the law on mitigation it's wide open. I mean, basically any fact or circumstance bearing on the crime, the defendant, the background, the circumstances, all of that is fair game. So that's the type of thing, if you haven't done death penalty litigation, you have probably done some, background stuff for clients for sentencing and stuff, but this is just a whole different level. So those are the types of things that they're looking for. His public defender that he has right now, they brought her in from Kootenai County, which is up north. It's near Spokane,
Right.
and she is death qualified. So looks pretty clear to me that yes, they are at least anticipating these types of things happening, and got her on board for that reason.
Yeah, and by the way, this is an interesting fact, but I believe the last death penalty case they tried to run in Idaho, there was a report here that Idaho could not obtain the lethal injection drugs, so they had to call off the execution. So very interesting facts here. It's not like Idaho executes dozens of people a year, right? I mean, these are very rare instances, particularly in Idaho. So this is not something that, yes, even though they're death certified, it's not like they've been on, 100 cases. They may have had, her attorney may have been on one, like you said, a second chair or something. Very, very, very rare occurrence. So that's what I would think in terms of experience level. They're not going to be somebody that has sat on this. They only do death cases. There wouldn't be enough work. They would be bored, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And they're also not going to just pull, whoever happens to be there in Latah County and say, good luck,
Yeah, go in there.
You've handled a few assaults. Go have fun,
Yeah, you're dealing with DUIs and illegal possession charges, and sending them in there. It's like, come on, man, come on. That's a shame. Says thoughts on Indiana traffic stops from Indiana public defenders, i.e., my office. Oh, okay, awesome if you're a public defender. FBI lost car while tailing. Law enforcement answered Bolo or the cops placed a GPS tracker. They were pulled over on I-70, which is not the expected route. A lot of slang in there. I mean, do you think there's a potential defense issue? Because a lot of people brought up, if the FBI were involved in the traffic stop, if they were the ones that directed it, does that raise a good defense issue, a solid defense, if there's, FBI fuckery afoot?
Here's the issue I see with that. If they stopped the car pretextually, meaning they stopped him for this traffic violation, but the real reason that was just a pretext. The real reason they stopped him was to get eyes on him or find him, make sure they can track him again or whatever. That's legal. The Fourth Amendment law says that's perfectly fine. Indiana law says that's perfectly fine. But here's where the potential problem is. There's this other body of law that says when you do a traffic stop, the scope of that detention, the length of time you're allowed to detain those people is limited to the circumstances that justified you making that stop in the first place. So if you're stopping somebody for a traffic infraction, you can detain them for as long as you are dealing with that traffic infraction. But once you turn your attention to something else, you have now expanded the scope of that stop, and you need an independent basis for not having a warrant to do that. So that's where I see the potential challenge here. Idaho has looked at this particular issue as well. Their test for it is whether the officer abandoned the purpose of the initial stop. And so in this situation, we've all seen the body cam videos, and I would just ask, when was he done with the following too close? It didn't look like he was all that interested in it for very long to me.
At all.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think they would have the potential avenue to argue that this body cam footage should not be admissible.
Yeah. Let's see. Megan says, is it just me, or is Kohberger the spitting image of Time Buddy? I don't see that, Megan. That's not what I don't see that spitting image. But I think that once again, when you look and you try to tie these people together, you're like, oh, this guy is like this guy, so this guy is going to look like him. I think we do that a lot. So I don't see it. But hey, if you see it, you see it. Anna says, hypothetical question: can a defendant request a death penalty in a case that's outlawed it? No, you can't say I wanna die, instead of life in prison. I mean, I guess the thought there is that you'd be treated poorly in prison, but the thing is, you're going to be in prison pending the appeal, so you're probably going to be in there for a while. Sometimes there's an automatic, appeal, so you might be in there for a while, even if you were kind of accepting of your fate, or at least waiting for.
There was a case I remember back in Washington, back in, I want to say about 96, 97, somewhere in that ballpark. The guy's name was Jeremy Sagastigi, and he was one of the last people Washington put to death. But the reason why I remember it is because it was a situation where he wanted to die. He waived all of his appeals, deliberately sought out the death penalty. And so he got what he wanted because Washington law allows for that. But if they didn't, no, I mean, you're on your own, bud.
Yeah. Now I know there are some states that do allow you, if it's death penalty and they have multiple methods. I think Utah is one of those states where they allow you to pick your poison, right? It's like, we got a firing squad, we got lethal injection, and we got death by bees.
Hanging.
It's like honestly though, if it like, it's like, I'm gonna pick the badass one. Like, hang me, motherfuckers. Like, I want to see this shit. But yeah, no, that does exist, right? So if they had options, then you can pick your option. That does exist, I believe, in at least one state. I know Utah. I don't know the others, but
Idaho is just lethal injection, and you already saw this has actually been an issue all over the country with the inability to source these drugs that are part of the protocol, and some of that is political because the manufacturers of these drugs are not distributing them for this purpose, and so they are creating the shortage that makes it impossible for the protocol to be followed, and people can't be put to death. So that's, of course, a long ways down the road if he is convicted, if he gets the death penalty, if all the appeals go through and stand and stuff. But that is just kind of an interesting thing that, even when you get the death penalty, there's no guarantee they're going to carry it out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just laughing. Rumble saying death by snooze too. And then over here on locals, I got a $1 tip from Ben again. It says visualizing Andrea with one hand on Legal Eagle's forehead, holding him at a distance while he flails wildly in the air. This is the fan fiction we need.
That's me in the ring, basically.
Create the meme. Create the meme, guys. You can do it right now. That's a shame says, if there were two cops on the stop, I believe talking about the Indiana traffic stop. One approaches on each side, but which is typical cop procedure, especially after a lot of the shootings. One cop will approach on each side. One's on your blind side. One's talking to you. One talks, the other places the tracker. I'm skeptical of this theory, but it came from more experienced attorneys than me. Well, if they were going to play, if I did it, if I was going to place a tracker, yeah, that's how you would do it, right?
Yeah.
But we have no proof that happens. So Andrea and I would be wild speculating on that, on the placing of a tracker.
And I'd be highly skeptical that they would do that, just because that is one of those areas that it is very clear you need to have a warrant to do that. I don't see them jeopardizing, any part of this case when you can have the plane fly overhead. You can have the car tail him. I mean, you can wait for him in Pennsylvania.
Your social media presence gives it away. I mean, there's so much stuff that can give away where you're at and allow them to track you. And at that point, I think they even had search warrants for a lot of the electronics. So I think it'd be pretty easy to track this guy. I don't think they needed a physical GPS tracker on the car at that point in the investigation, at the Indiana point of the investigation. I don't think that's necessary. At all. I think they knew where he was going. I think they knew his parents' house, his parents' location. They knew he was headed there.
And the reality is too, if he had his phone on him, they can get a warrant to ping his phone the entire way. So they don't need a different tracker. Turn your cell phone into a tracker. It already is one.
Let's get into that thing, Andrea. I was waiting for the segue because speaking of breaking bones here that are not legal, Jennifer Coffindaffer, she said, let's talk about pings. I can't. While not precise, it's strong circumstantial evidence of his activity, placing him near King historically on the day of the murders. Also, no cell activity during the window of the murders is telling. This is important, but the DNA is a dagger. And note that the pings also put him there the day after. So he actually comes, according to the pings in the affidavit, right? This is the allegations. Mm-hmm. They put him in the area. You did a huge clapback, and I would encourage everybody to come here and read this on Twitter because this was actually fantastic. But could you give us a TLDR version? I mean, we're very simple people here on Legal Mindset. Just a simple Florida lawyer here. Can you explain why pings are not as reliable as we think they are?
Yeah, well, the 10,000 foot reason is because it just depends on the cell tower coverage. That's the bottom line. If you're in an area like, say, the East Coast of the United States, where I think Ms. Coffindorfer is, you can anticipate there are cell towers everywhere. There is a massive amount of coverage. There's lots of overlapping. And what that does is it allows them to triangulate the cell phone from how it connects and communicates with the different towers in its area. And so basically, to get good location data from a ping, the phone needs to be communicating with either 3 towers or with 2 towers and having an angle of direction of that communication as well. If you have all that, then you can calculate it pretty precisely. The problem is, this is not the East Coast of the United States. This is Moscow, Idaho. I drive to Moscow, Idaho from Walla Walla. I go down Highway 12. And just to give you an example, about maybe 40 minutes outside of Walla Walla, I will lose my cell phone signal. I will not pick it up again until Colfax, Washington, even though I'm on a major state highway. This is like 100 miles with no coverage at all. So this is not an area with a lot of dense towers in a big network. So the affidavit at this point is just very sparse on the facts. We don't know what their data is. We don't know what their methodology is. If they weren't able to triangulate, sometimes they try to use these other methods that have, been challenged in court and aren't always.
Andrea, they have this HD photo here that is in such good quality that they have in their affidavit. But Andrea, this is not conclusive evidence based on cellular device information. Well, let me put something like people say Walla Walla is hilarious. Yeah, every time you say Walla Walla, I do snicker a little bit. It is internally at least. And Jim is right about this. You need a minimum of 3 cell towers to triangulate a position. That's why it's called triangulate. It's the same thing with tracking radio. 2 towers will give you a radius of 3 to 5 miles. So one thing they asked me was yesterday. I got a question: is because there's a statement in the affidavit. Where actually it's right here. I was not even looking. Right here, where investigators found that the phone did connect to a cell phone tower that provides service to Moscow on November 14th, so that's after the murders. But investigators do not believe that Bryan's phone was in Moscow on that date. And this was an interesting comment. People are like, well, how do you figure out that you're not there, but you're connecting off a tower? And I guess it's like you said, it's the middle of nowhere. It's Moscow, Idaho.
Well, and also this goes back to the other problem with pings is that there is a lot of reasons why a cell phone will connect with a particular tower, and proximity is just one reason. There's all kinds of other things can affect it. There's a mountain in the way, so it connects to a different one. There's too much cell traffic on this one, so it connects to another one. Those types of things are the details that really tell you how strong of an inference you can actually draw from the fact of the cell phone connecting to a tower or not. Because otherwise, like your viewer pointed out, you can have a cell phone tower that has a range of, if its range is 5 miles, then you have a 25 square mile area approximately. Well, it's, I'm not going to do the pi math in my head, but whatever.
I cannot. That's why I'm a lawyer. I'll make the joke. I'll make the cringe joke. That's why I'm a lawyer. I mean, doing the math. Other than money, it's like, well, pay me what you owe me, motherfucker. But that's about it.
It makes it so much less precise because all it can basically tell you is he's in this massive area. It doesn't give you any more detailed information.
Yeah. Isaac Baruch's wholesome gobbledygook said, born in Walla Walla, fun growing up in the Blue Mountains. Oh, okay.
For sure.
Is that area nice? Is it kind of beautiful?
It's spectacular. It's like Mayberry. It's wonderful. It is a wonderful part of the world.
Yeah. Let me go with Aurelian says, my gut feeling is this guy is the scapegoat. 2 months of no real leads. Excuse me for not taking the state at its word. So let's go over that. What do you think about the timing? I mean, I was a little worried actually first when I was covering this case, and I did cover it because so many people asked me to cover it. And I think much like you're bringing a voice of sanity to something that's getting an insane level of coverage and speculation. And before he was caught, I was saying, hey, look, at this point in the investigation, we're leading towards a cold case. We're not there yet, and obviously there's a lot of facts and data to sift through, but the longer it goes, the harder it's going to be to find somebody. So do you think the timing was problematic, or do you think this is kind of the normal course of investigation?
Well, now having seen the affidavit as kind of their explanation for the timing, it definitely makes a lot more sense because obviously they did have to go through a lot of steps to build all of these circumstances to put them all together to get the big picture. I was at this point skeptical that they were going to find the guy. And it's in part for the reason you suggested, like, yes, the more time that goes by, the less likely that you are to be able to find him. But also because it suggested that they were going to be relying heavily on the DNA in particular, like whatever that type of evidence they could get from the scene. And if they didn't have a particular target to be able to compare that to, it really is a long shot. They are gambling that this guy is going to be in the CODIS system, which is the centralized like FBI database where all of the law enforcement agencies send all the DNA samples that they get. They will regularly look for suspects through that by comparing whatever DNA they have. They run it through CODIS, see if they get a hit. If they're building this case on a CODIS hit, that's a long shot. So that's what it was starting to look like to me was going to be the make or break. And that could have been, you may have to wait until you have more killings and more DNA in the database to start be able to building patterns here. So I'm glad that is not the case, and they were able to at least, get this process started. If it isn't Mr. Kohberger, great, then we can start the process of clearing him.
Again. Yeah.
But at least, it gives them something to work with.
I will say if it's not Mr. Kohberger, it's going to be very desperate for them to find somebody at this point because of just the amount. Now the amount of time that will have elapsed, particularly if they take it through trial without another suspect, right? It's going to be very, very hard to try to find somebody else for this.
Well, and it's even more than that. It's not even just the evidence. It's what happens psychologically when they think they've got him and then maybe it turns out they don't. There's a lot that goes on with accusing somebody of something like this. And there's a lot of, biases and things like that go along with it. And so it's not at all, from my perspective as a defense attorney, once the police have you targeted, trying to get them to open their minds up to the possibility that they might be wrong is very, very difficult. And you see that, with cases where people have been acquitted and the prosecutor or the police, the investigators or whatever will to their dying days, maintain that they had gotten it right. And, there isn't anywhere else to be looking. So that's a big hurdle to overcome if he were to get off, not just that the evidence has gone cold and stuff, but just convincing, the police being able to open their minds up to alternative theories could be a challenge.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think when you've committed to something, when you focus on something, when you have your theory, you tend to double down. You don't tend to back out and say, hey, I'm going to go another way. Particularly, I'm going to say it. And you're a PD, and I'll be fair. Both prosecutors and PDs, I kind of separate them out, especially if they're long-term servers. Like there's people that are just doing it because it's their first job or whatever. Those people tend to weed out. But then there's what I call the true believers, right?
We're the true believers.
The true believers. You know what I'm talking about. There's the people that
know what you mean.
believe that everybody is 100% innocent and truly believe on the prosecution side that everybody is a dirty, dirty criminal. They need to be locked up forever. And they are emotionally committed to that, mentally committed to that. They buy that into to propose to them that they got it wrong is heresy. I mean, it is that level of
well, it's creating this ego challenge that is too much to bear, because if they got it wrong this time, they might have gotten it wrong other times, and people have suffered some pretty harsh consequences as the result of prosecutors thinking that you're guilty. So to open up that door it's going to be hard for people to accept that potential responsibility they may have for mistakes they may have made.
Yeah. Let's see. So Sepulveda says, I don't know how often people get stopped by the cops for traffic violations, but I've only gotten 3 in my entire driving career, and I drive like a bat out of hell. Hey, listen, I'll tell you this personal experience. I grew up in Miami, Florida, one of the craziest places ever to learn how to drive. And my dad literally told me, son, in Miami, your best defense is a good offense. I'm like, holy shit. So I nearly died many times as a child, speeding. I would do 110 on the highway easy, never got pulled over. Left Miami for, North Carolina, Gainesville. Immediately I'm getting tickets. So, I think it can just be where your local cops, are they feeling like assholes or not? I mean, when I was in Gainesville, I would get stopped routinely just to get checked to see if I was drinking. So, you know, I think it's hit or miss.
Yeah, definitely local culture plays a big role, and also just things like, where does their funding come from? How much of the funding from writing a ticket goes to the department? How much of it goes to the court? How much of it goes to the state? If you have an incentive to write the ticket, you're probably going to write more tickets.
We actually had this is crazy in Florida. We had a town's entire police department disbanded because it was pretty much ruled to be just solely a speed trap, and they were maintaining their police force for the purpose of enforcing those tickets because that's where all the revenue is coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane.
Gross.
So the Florida Supreme Court was like, yeah, fuck you, we're done with this. You guys lose police, you know. So, it's like, you know, two sheds in a double wide. That's a shame. Said, sorry for the abbreviations. I'm a PD. I'm poor. Hey, listen, Andrea,
I feel you, man. I feel you.
Yeah, but let me ask you real quick, because we have a PD in this case. I mean, why did you originally? Because I don't think I've asked you this, especially not one-on-one. Why did you become a public defender? Because a lot of people, especially in a case like this, they malign the people on the defense side. They go, how could anybody defend this murderer? How could anybody defend these pieces of shit? What were your motivations, Andrew? What drove you to do this and continue to do this?
Well, I'm contrary as fuck, Andrew.
I know that. Okay, I know that.
So I don't care what people think. No, the main reason is really just because I believe in the mission. I very, very strongly believe in the mission from a human standpoint. I believe that, yes, even the guilty are entitled to representation. And part of that is understanding what that means. Sometimes your job as the defense attorney is as simple as explaining to your client, this is what prison you're likely to go to. Here's what the classification process will be. Here's how your family can write to you. You're there to help them through the process and to make the smartest decisions that they can. And so I think there's often this misconception that, the defense lawyer is going to paint this rosy picture, is going to, go in and tell a bunch of bullshit to the jury and just whatever. And that's not in my client's interest to do that. What is in my client's interest is for me to have a very objective view of the case, because that's what the jury is going to have. My ultimate goal here is to predict what a jury is going to do or what a judge is going to do. And so that helps me when, my client, I may, for example, I remember a situation where my guy's on camera, he's on camera committing the offense.
Like, it's clearly him.
It's right
clearly
there.
Him. Yeah,
he's insistent. Yeah. It's not him. It doesn't even look like him. I'm like, that's 100% fine. That's your right. And if you want to go to trial, we're going to go to trial. But I'm just going to tell you, the jury may not see it that way. And that's a lot of what the job ultimately consists of is, just trying to be able to communicate that perspective to people to help them, internalize and make smart decisions about what to do in their case.
In an area where your life, liberty, or property is on stake, right? Because that's the whole thing. I mean, this is a deprivation of your liberty. So you need somebody there who knows and can advise you the best.
And a lot of the times too, you're not dealing with, did this guy do something that he's going to get punished for or not? You're dealing with, did he do what the state is saying he did? Or, did he do something that warrants the punishment, that the state's going to be asking for? So a lot of the defense work is not so much like, I have an innocent guy and I need to prove that he's innocent. Yeah, it happens, but it's rare. I mean, the dirty secret of public defense is that most of the people, they did something, they're there for a reason.
And this is why I like you, because you admit that, right? See, that's the thing. That's the thing that I think a lot of public defenders, they like try to bury down. It's like, do you accept the fact? That's my litmus test. Do you accept the fact that the majority of people, I'm just saying 50% plus one at least, right, are probably guilty, of the crime for which they are accused? And if they're, I know they're honest if they answer yes, because to me, yes, it is the majority. But does that mean that, okay, we just roll over and, they don't get their due process? No, of course, it's fundamental to our rights as Americans and as a free country that goes through this system of justice. I mean, I think it's one of the most core American rights is to go through this process. Are there ways we can improve it? Yes, of course, right? There's ways we can
Sure.
improve the process, but it's important that we give everybody a fair shake. And even Kevin here. So the affidavit is damning, if true, and the DA Santa proves the DA does look like Rip Van Winkle.
It does.
He's going to need Jose Baez for the story. Did this mom SAM causing the whole situation? Oh God, we were watching the Casey Anthony trial, doing a rewatch, and
Oh God,
just
yeah.
when he was, and just because the new allegations right against George, and I had forgotten because it's been so long since I watched the trial, where Jose just says, she's 8 years old and she's got her dad's dick in her mouth, and I'm like, I'm just sitting there like, what? I don't think there's going to be one, essay allegations here, but there could be bombshells. There could be stories. I mean, I guess, Andrea, from a PD's perspective, is it better? Because a lot of people, they try to come up with very elaborate stories. Is it better to try to come up with some elaborate theory of the case for defense, or just come out with, de minimis, poking the holes and reasonable doubt, and kind of keep it simple, stupid? Which strategy tends to be better?
It depends on what you have to work with.
Okay.
By and large, most cases, I think you're following that second strategy. You're poking holes in it. You are offering reasonable alternative explanations for the evidence in front of the jury. That's kind of my shorthand way that I would use to explain to juries how I would think they should think about the reasonable doubt idea. If the state has, we're all looking at the same facts. The state has this theory of what the facts mean, but if there is an alternative theory that is reasonable, that should be reasonable doubt. Yes. So that's most of the time, because unless you have pretty good affirmative evidence, of something else, of a specific set of facts, then you don't really help yourself out by trying to prove something but failing, or proving something weakly. One of the important strategies that defense lawyers have is you have to pick your theory and stick with it. There's often this inclination to take a shotgun approach, and just every single little discrepancy, every little problem, every question, to just pull it out. But if none of it ties together and makes sense why you're doing this, it kind of ends up being, but it doesn't matter. Like who cares? Right. Sometimes people make typos on their document. It doesn't result in a not guilty. It doesn't mean that the basic thing that's being reported isn't correct. So
you're saying, for example, instead of saying, hey, look, what about Murphy? Let's think about the dog. Let's think about the, coming out with, okay, it could have been a murder plot by the roommate. It could have been, some vengeance. It could have been some other rando. It could have been some dude they, swipe left on Tinder, whatever else. Instead of trying to take all of those theory of the case, it's okay, stick with one, and maybe just, hey, pure reasonable doubt. Hey, there's no proof that this guy definitively did this. The evidence you have is not reliable, and stick with that. Because I think what I hear you saying, and I think, just forget about my lawyer side, just as a human, when I hear people trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, it comes off as they are desperately searching for an excuse.
Desperate. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Agree more.
And nobody likes desperation,
Yeah. No, and one of the other challenges too that they have with trying to put on an actual affirmative defense, the most common ones that a defendant will put on are an alibi defense, which is great. If you have that evidence and it's strong evidence, alibi defenses can be fantastic. If you've got it, yes, you definitely want to consider using that. The other one that comes up a lot is called the SODI defense, SODDI. Some other dude did it. When you want to point the finger at somody else, that
I like
think,
that. Use that.
The SODI.
Yeah, because we know it was Steve Gosney, really, by the way. We know Steve Gosney is the real murderer here.
But there's very strict standards for being able to to introduce that type of evidence. You have to have a very, very strong case that in fact somebody else did it. And usually if there's a strong case that somebody else did it, there's also, holes to poke in the case that you did it. So those things can kind of overlap and make that a little bit of a strategic decision, just depending on what you have to work with.
Yeah. Let's see one more question. Could either of you comment on Bryan at the PA at PA wearing gloves while putting out garbage bags? in the middle of the night into the neighbor's garbage can. Police saw this and took the garbage. Once again, I haven't followed all, like, this is a fact, and I'm not even sure whether it's a fact or a theory. If this was something he was doing, of course they can bring this up, and they were at that point, have officers that can testify to seeing that, that would be a fact. I don't know whether it's conclusive. Once again, circumstantial. You could have some nasty ass shit you're trying to put out because it smells horrible and trying to put it in your neighbor's trash. I've done that. I'm gonna be honest. Let me raise my hand. Have I done that? Yes. Some stinky ass stuff. I'm in Asia. We got this fruit called durian. If you don't know what durian smells like, it smells like rotting feet. It's nasty.
Lovely.
I keep there's signs like don't bring it on the metro. Like I
Isn't
put
there
that
something
stuff,
about isn't there something about fish that gets buried under the porch for like 6 months too?
that's to make kimchi. Yeah. So like you can like
God.
if you have to ferment stuff. So like
Yeah.
there's like fermented stingray. That stuff smells like shit as
Oh
well.
my
Like
Lord.
I would not put that anywhere near my place. I'd put it like in the neighbor's trash, right? Even kimchi, right? Kimchi actually stinks up your whole fridge, right? If you don't seal it properly, it has to be very well sealed. So there's reasons that can be explained. That's not a damning fact. It's not like, oh my God, he used gloves for the trash and threw it up far away. He is a murderer. I mean, that step alone, not enough. But when you go to trial and you put facts together and you've got a prosecutor who's able to weave these together, that's where you go.
Well, and so this particular piece of information is another one that came out from an anonymous law enforcement source. And so I encourage people to be highly skeptical of this information for a lot of reasons. The main one being it isn't vetted. Even if it's true, even if this is a legitimate law enforcement source providing legitimate information, it's a very small piece. One of the things that was also reported in that story was that he washed his car while he was in Pennsylvania, did a thorough washing of his car. Yep. Okay, that's all fine and good. But the problem is a lot of people wash their car all the time. Some people are really freaking anal about their cars. Like I know a lot of car people. I know people that like show their cars and stuff like that. Like in and of itself, that may not mean anything at all. It may be a perfectly normal thing that he does, every Saturday at noon. So it's just very difficult to be able to draw anything meaningful from it. And that's why this leaking process, the selective leaking, is so disturbing, is because it's achieving that goal of presenting this kind of one-sided, tailored view of him that fits the police officer's narrative, but it may end up being completely untrue by the time you get to trial.
Yeah, and you may see a lot of the things that people have speculated on, a lot of things that people have thought, theories that they've had, just being wildly untrue, just absolutely something that's not there. I know there were a lot of theories starting out about, Jack the boyfriend, or, the Grubhub food truck guy, totally eliminated as suspects, right? Wasn't the Uber driver? Well, it wasn't even an Uber. It was like a private campus shuttle when you're drunk, sort of the drunk bus. They had that at UF and UNC when I was there. You call them up and they come get you. All these people were cleared. So you may find out these things are absolutely not true. One thing that is true, though, Andrea, is the chat does love you and really appreciate you. So I'm really glad you're able to come join me. I mean, El Chingon says, what crime do I have to do to get this lady to be my boo? Listen,
probably murder my husband, but I don't recommend that.
But you are very beloved, Andrea. Whenever I send us a poll of like, what's your favorite female law tuber? And you won hands far and away. In my polls on my channel, which is heavily biased, I will say. My channel is extraordinarily biased. They're bigots, misogynists, and they're biased. Even the ladies. So what going forward, what should we look forward to in this case? What are the next milestones we're going to hit with this case? I know we have a hearing that's scheduled, I believe, next week. I believe the speculation there at the next hearing is that perhaps there could be private counsel appointed. Maybe there could be a passing of the torch. I guess it's possible. What would you expect to see kind of as the procedure going forward in this case?
Yeah, so I expect the next hearing to be kind of a nothing burger. It's the arraignment, and so it's basically just going to be him formally entering his plea. At any point, he can substitute in a private attorney if he wants to hire one. He can do that whenever he wants to. It doesn't require any particular process to do that other than just filing the paperwork saying, I'm your lawyer now. So I don't expect necessarily something like that to happen. The next thing that will happen that I think is going to be interesting to watch is when they get to the preliminary hearing. And so this is a process that in Idaho they have to follow if they charge somebody with an information rather than a grand jury indictment. They have to have essentially a mini trial on probable cause where all this information that's here in the affidavit, they can't rely. This affidavit is technically hearsay. They can't rely on that. They're going to have to call these witnesses in to be able to testify to these specific details. So that's a process that's going to be available. He can waive it. There are some reasons why, he might consider it. The main one just being the, again, continued media that paints him, makes him look bad. It's a situation where there's no real benefit to him to presenting an innocence case at this stage because it doesn't really get considered. All the court's really concerned about is the state's evidence enough to create a suspicion of murder here. So there's nothing really affirmative that he can do. Yeah, there's nothing really affirmative that he can do that can be helpful. So I don't expect him to waive it because this ends up being a little bit of a test run. You get these witnesses under oath. When you have them under oath, it's available for impeachment later if they deviate from, any aspect of what they said at the preliminary hearing. You start to get a feel for them. How do these people handle themselves on the stand? Who's a tough witness to crack? Who's an easy witness to crack? It's like getting a free rehearsal,
a preview. Yeah.
You get a test run, you get a scrimmage, where the stakes are really low.
Are there any witnesses you think might be easy to crack in this case that you've seen so far? I mean, a lot of the information we have is from so far law enforcement. The only one we have that's out there is the roommate. I mean, the roommate is the one that is probably the non-LEO, the variable. Right. Mm-hmm. Do you think that would be where they would target kind of their focus from a defense strategy?
I don't think so. Not necessarily. I would see it as more kind of test runs with the cops. There's a wide variety of quality and experience and intelligence and everything that you get with the police force. Some police officers are really good witnesses. You want to know who they are so that you can avoid them as much as possible. If there is, information that's critical to get about you're going to try to get it from a different cop, not that cop. And then some of the cops are going to be easy touches. They're likable people. They are agreeable people. They're going to be easily led. You're going to be able to feed them things. So that's the type of thing I think they'll be getting a feel for.
Got it. All right. A couple more comments here about the washing the car. Ali says, it's winter. Washing the car would freeze the locks if the temperature was below 40 degrees. I'm skeptical about that rumor. I'm not a meteorologist, and nor do I remember the temperature in Pennsylvania when he was washing his car. I'm sure that if it was to the point where it was like it was that freezing, he's not gonna try to wash his car when it's below when it's below 40. But who knows? I mean, I think that we need more information regarding that instance. I'm not willing to say, okay, because he washed his car, it means X. I'm like, that's a very interesting fact. I would like to know more about it. That's how I take it. That's how I take this. And I think that's the same way to approach information, is to say, hey, listen, this is a very interesting fact. I'm going to continue to look into this. And yes, there's some facts that look better for the defense and some facts look better for the prosecution. I think that's fair to acknowledge. But to come out and say one factor alone is the factor that broke the camel's back, at least at this point, I don't see that. BK won't be dating women in his near far future. I mean,
I beg to differ. As someone who has frequently been invited to connect on inmatemingle.com, he's going to have a fan club.
Do you know the word hybristophilia? Have you heard of that?
No.
Okay. Hybristophilia is a very specific condition. It only happens with women. It doesn't happen with men, but it is a attraction to violence, particularly extreme violence and criminality, right? There is a specific trait. There are specific people, right? I haven't done a deep dive in their personality, but they are very attracted to that. And like you said, there's inmate mingle. There's people that look specifically for the dudes. There's people that will be obsessed. I remember the Dahmer docuseries. All the girls posted on TikTok, Instagram. I just watched the Dahmer series. I can change him.
Oh, I remember it from the Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the
Yes.
Boston
Oh
Marathon
my
bomber,
God,
when they
they were
stuck him on
so
Rolling
thirsty.
Stone. When they stuck him on Rolling Stone, like he's Harry Styles or something. And yeah, they were
Oh my
so
God.
thirsty.
The buckets were coming out. I mean, it was bad. It was real bad. But yeah, so RN, don't count them out. Don't count them out.
You just need to redefine your expectations for dating, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's the conjugal visit, right?
He's going to be talking to a lot of people.
Oh yes. El Chicken said, keep the 2, 69 and for my, I don't know what that reference is, but okay. Thank you very much, Chingon. I'm off to bed. Good night. And Jay says there's too much salt from the snow. Car gets mad dirty. All right. Listen, makes sense, right? It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think though washing the car would have necessarily gotten rid of or fixed too much regarding the crime scene. The car wasn't a material piece of evidence. It was really the sheath was what they were going on. And
the car is mainly important because they're going to be looking for transfer DNA from the victims. They're going to be looking for like dog hair. They're going to be looking for fibers, you know, things like that are not quite as good of evidence, but at least gives them something that can connect the crime scene with the interior of the car. And that's really going to be a hit or miss type of situation.
Yeah. And shout out to Valiant over there. He got his Twitter back after attacking people for certain alignment. So thank you for that. And guys, do please smash the like button. There's 1,700 of you here today, which is amazing. And the most important thing you guys can do is go over here to this little channel, Andrea Burkhart Law, and make sure you're subscribed because we need to get Andrea to 70K, you know, and pump her up there. So Andrea, last thing on this that I want to make sure we definitely hit. Timeline. When do you think it goes to trial? Give me your over, under, your guesstimate. When do we see this trial? When are you and I covering this trial?
Oh, man. It's so hard to say, but I am going to say 2 years.
You could do it 2 years.
Say 2 years.
What's your low mark? Like, what's your fastest it goes?
Fastest it goes is if he does the I'm going to pedal to the metal, invoke my speedy trial, and then it goes to trial by approximately August.
Yeah, that's
July or August.
That's what I was thinking too. If he invokes speedy trial, that's the only way to get it by. But
I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think that's realistic, given how much forensic technical stuff is involved in this case. If he does intend to mount a actual like strong challenge, he's going to need the time to get his own people on board, to do their own investigations, to do their review of the state stuff, and that just takes a lot of time.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you're going to want that from a defense standpoint, right? You're not just going to want to, hey, we're going to rely on what the state said about this. Like, absolutely 100% not. You're going to want to go and test it yourself, find holes in it, find the procedure where they may have fucked up. You know, mind you, some of this evidence, they even said in the affidavit, they got in the second pass. Well, is it possible they fucked up on the first pass and, you know, that diamond printed, pattern was from some tech's shoe or some other person's shoe. People were running through the crime scene, you know, so there's lots of potential holes to poke in this, in the evidence they have. It seems in the affidavit like it's conclusive. They try to make it that way, but mind you, that is being framed by them. It's very easy to frame stuff in a light positive to yourself when you're the only one presenting the evidence and there's no counter argument. But honestly, Andrea, I will say some people want this case to go to trial, like, you know, next month or the month after,
tomorrow.
And that's why I tell people you gotta focus on the ball. This is a long slog. This is not something that's going to be resolved, and it's not something where we're going to be able to prove guilt right away. But certainly when it goes to trial, yeah, we'll be covering it for sure.
Definitely,
no doubt about that. Amy says, heard that his current PD had her last murder trial defendant acquitted because of a cop lying or something along those lines. Not sure if that was true. I saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. It was in a Daily Mail article that did like a sort of feature on the public defender. I tried to see what I could find out about her, but it's very, very difficult for trial attorneys because it's easy. I did a video about the judge who's easy to research because judges' decisions get appealed. And so then you have decisions, you know, that are published that you can go find and evaluate. Public defenders at the trial level don't create that kind of precedent. But so I saw this article and I think it was something to the effect of she won this on some type of law enforcement dishonesty. I don't
Yeah, so
recall exactly
this
what it
this
was.
is an article on it. First of all, I haven't vetted this article.
Then got
I just looked it up real
reconvicted
quick.
during the second trial.
Yes. So apparently it was a case of Jonathan Ellington, 45, who was convicted and sentenced to 25 years for the crime of allegedly using his car to run over a woman in a road rage. However, the case was soon toppled because the Idaho police officer, Fred Rice, was accused of false testimony. At the time, Taylor claimed Rice, who was pivotal in the verdict of Ellington, had a presence in the courtroom and lied in court. Supreme Court ruled that Rice did in fact lie on stand. Ellington was later reconvicted of the charges during a second trial. She graduated from University of Idaho, where all the four slang were studying. She has a bachelor's in political science. So do I. Master's in public administration. So do I. I just got my degrees and a JD. That's pretty much me too. So worked for the PD's office from 2004 to 2012. So that's actually pretty experienced. I don't know about you, but in my experience, when I see somebody who's been at the PD's office for over 5 years, I call them a lifer. Right.
Yeah.
You know,
chances are pretty good at that point you've committed.
Right. Because either you're going to go into private practice and try to make more money, right? Do your own personal grift, or you're committed to the mission of the public defender's office. And also you love the trial volume. Nobody is going to get trial volume like the public defenders.
100%.
None of the private attorneys are going to get that volume. So if you want trial experience, you're going to want to be a state attorney or a public defender, because the amount of trial experience you're going to get is unrivaled. Your pay sucks. The pay is horrible. But the amount
and
of
all
work
the other perks, the thank yous you get,
Yes, those thank yous, yeah, especially on the defense side, right? The thank yous involving your the claims that you're incompetent, right? I forget which rule that's under, probably where you're practicing, but the claim that, hey, my lawyer was so incompetent I did not receive a defense. Those are always great. Those are great when you hear somebody who's a PD getting those claims. I feel bad. I feel bad for them. So what cases are you, as we kind of turn to wrap this up, what cases are you going to be covering coming up? Are you looking at any of these cases at the end of the month? Are you planning to kind of jump in on any of them, or any of them kind of pique your interest in the near term?
Yeah, well, so at this point, my biggest hope is just to be able to keep track of what happens with them. I am still a full-time practicing lawyer, and things got a little crunchy for me this week. So I'm probably not going to be covering them. I'll be relying on other folks to do that.
Right.
So if you're going to be talking about any of them, Andrew, I'll probably be in your chat.
Absolutely, that's great. And I may, I'm going to be probably streaming at some of them. So I may, if you feel like popping on at some point and you get bored and maybe you just want to be the person who I end up filling in about the case, I would love to do that, because your perspective as a public defender is completely different than a lot of other folks. A lot of attorneys, for example, myself, I'm not in the criminal field. That's not something I do on a day-to-day. And getting it from a defense perspective is so important, because I think a lot of the media, a lot of the channels out there, they're really focused on the prosecution side, the guilt side, the ascribing blame side. So having that presumption of defense is always something that I appreciate, because I think that's something that is so vital under our Constitution, and it's so neglected in the modern day.
100%.
So anyways, guys, Andrea Aburkhartlaw, make sure you're following her. Make sure you've got that covered over here as well on Twitter. She is really killing it on Twitter. Honestly, I love when she goes in on people on this. It is fantastic. And obviously, as there's updates to this, we'll stay tuned, guys. One last super chat here. Anna P says, we have 1.6K watching, under 300 likes. Come on, guys. Like the video. Yes, appreciate it, guys. Like the video, like this content. It tells me that we can make more of it, and helps me and Andrea know that you like this and appreciate it. So until next time, guys, take care, stay based,